There was always something unsettling about the things Victor Newman chose not to say, those carefully constructed silences that seemed to hold more weight than any words he ever spoke aloud. Genoa City had long learned to accept the gaps in Victor's narratives as part of his mythic presence, the unspoken truth that power did not require explanation. But the return of Matt Clark, one of the most venomous villains to ever threaten the Newman family, cast a long shadow across the town and resurrected a question that had lingered for years in the background like an unresolved echo. What exactly did Victor do to Matt Clark? With the newly circulating rumors of Matt's unexpected reappearance, the wound was reopened, raw and pulsing with uncertainty. For decades, Victor's promise to take care of those who threatened his family had been a vow steeped in both loyalty and menace. His decision to deal with Matt had always felt definitive, permanent, final. Yet the ambiguity of that finality was precisely what terrified people now. Because no one, not Nikki, not Nick, not Victoria, not even the closest of allies, had ever learned the true extent of Victor's solution. Victor had spoken of handling Matt with a calculated calm that unnerved even those accustomed to his darker tendencies. But the man had vanished, not imprisoned, not publicly defeated, not handed over to authorities, simply erased, swept into a void where Victor's influence ran deeper than the legal system and the boundaries of morality. It was an absence so complete that the town subconsciously agreed not to question it further. To challenge Victor's methods would mean confronting how far he was willing to go for the sake of those he loved. And the truth, whatever it was, felt too dangerous to unearth. Yet now, with whispers of Matt resurfacing in Genoa City, the unspoken question returns with a force strong enough to rattle the very foundation of Victor's carefully curated legacy. If Matt is alive and walking freely, then Victor's many-layered silence becomes not just ominous, but suspicious. Did Victor strike a deal with the devil he claimed to destroy? Did he allow Matt to live under the condition of some hidden pact? Did he relocate him, manipulate him, weaponize him in ways no one could have predicted? Or worse, had Victor known all along that Matt would return not as a loose end, but as a contingency? Even Nikki Newman, who had stood by her husband through more moral storms than she cared to count, had admitted with quiet dread that she did not know what happened to Matt. Nick Newman, who had personally suffered at Matt's hands, confessed the same, feeling both anger and unease that his father might have orchestrated something beyond the boundaries of family loyalty. Their uncertainty exposed a psychological truth long buried beneath the Newman dynasty. Victor's definition of protecting his family was broader, darker, and far more strategic than anyone fully understood. The possibility of Matt's reappearance was not simply a threat. It was a reminder that Victor's unresolved chapters had a way of clawing themselves back into existence. Yet before Genoa City could fully untangle the re-emerging mystery surrounding Matt Clark, another storm threatened to break open in the form of Lily Winter's disappearance, a crisis Victor had secretly engineered as part of a fake kidnapping scheme designed to pressure Kane Ashby. Victor's maneuver, constructed with meticulous cunning, was never meant to escalate beyond controlled manipulation. It was intended to simulate danger, not create it. By designing a threat around Lily, Victor sought to force Kane into compliance, leveraging fear without intending to inflict actual harm. But in Genoa City, plans built on deception rarely stay predictable. Somewhere along the edges of Victor's carefully curated illusion, something went wrong. The staged kidnapping blurred into a real one, and Lily vanished instead of merely stepping into a role. The line between performance and peril dissolved, leaving Victor staring into the abyss of a plan that had betrayed its creator. The irony did not escape him. Victor Newman, master strategist, had built a trap that now endangered someone entirely outside his intended target. Lily's disappearance became not a tool, but a liability, a ripple that disrupted the entire web of control he believed he possessed. And it carried with it a haunting parallel to the Matt Clark situation, because both crises emerged from the parts of Victor's past he preferred not to examine too closely. From the decisions he made in secrecy, from the ends justify the means philosophy he wielded like armor. Now, that armor began to crack. As news of Lily's disappearance spread, Kane Ashby found himself cornered by a terror he could not rationalize. His past with Lily was turbulent, but his love for her ran deep enough to shatter at the thought that she had become collateral in a scheme he was not meant to uncover. He sensed Victor's hand behind the illusion, but he also knew that whatever control Victor intended to exert had slipped dangerously out of reach. If Lily's kidnapping was real, the threat was no longer negotiable, had evolved into something unpredictable, something that could destroy him, her, and their children in ways none of them anticipated. The city felt the tremor immediately. Lily was not just another resident, she was a symbol of resilience, a figure whose presence had woven deeply into the emotional tapestry of Genoa City. Her disappearance sent waves through her family, her workplace, and her social circles, and fear began to spread in whispers through the town. Maddie and Charlie, caught in the undertow of this terrifying ordeal, felt the shift in their world with a fear that neither parent could shield them from. They sensed the dread around them, the urgency in adult voices, the suffocating tension that made the air feel too thick to breathe. In their eyes, the unfolding situation was not a strategic maneuver gone wrong, but a nightmare that reached into the core of their family. Meanwhile, Victor found himself juggling two dangerous truths: the consequences of a failed kidnapping plot and the potential fallout from Matt Clark's resurfacing. Both crises carried a common thread. They originated from choices Victor had made behind closed doors, choices steeped in control, secrecy, and the unshakable belief that he alone could dictate outcomes. But now the outcomes were dictating him. The intertwining storms knotted his composure, forcing him to confront the possibility that the past he buried with force and determination was not only alive, but preparing to exact its own form of retribution. The prospect of Matt Clark returning to Genoa City opened a fissure in Victor's world that only the most hardened observers could fully appreciate. Matt had once been a direct threat to the Newman family, manipulating emotions and orchestrating attacks until Victor stepped in. To the world, the story ended there. But the real truth rested solely in Victor's hands. And now that truth was threatening to unravel. If Matt had not died, if Victor had not eliminated him as everyone assumed, then what did he do? Did Victor imprison him somewhere? Did he negotiate freedom in exchange for silence? Did he extract information, exploit him, or bury him in a place where he could not be found until now? The questions swirled like a vortex around the Newman household, each one sharpening the unease that permeated the family. Even Nikki, who always tried to see the best in Victor's choices, could not ignore the creeping dread that perhaps her husband had crossed a boundary that could not be justified by love alone. Nick, already unraveling under the weight of his own addiction and emotional turmoil, found the mystery surrounding Matt almost unbearable. He struggled to reconcile his father's unwavering confidence with the horrifying possibility that Victor had orchestrated something so morally fraught that even he could not admit it openly. Nick's trust in Victor had been strained before, but this crisis added a new layer of fragility to their fractured bond. And as he grappled with his dependency on painkillers of a battle slipping further from his control, the revelation that Victor had concealed Matt's fate only intensified his feelings of vulnerability and betrayal. The intersection of these unfolding narratives created a charged atmosphere in Genoa City, where every revelation seemed to carry the promise of deeper secrets lurking beneath the surface. The potential return of Matt Clark threatened not only physical danger, but the exposure of Victor's darkest machinations. Lily's disappearance underscored the unpredictability of schemes born in secrecy. And Kane, pulled between fear for Lily and desperation to protect his children, found himself facing a reckoning he could neither anticipate nor escape. As the town braced itself for the truth, one question loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. What happens when Victor Newman's past refuses to stay buried? Because in Genoa City, buried secrets have a way of resurrecting themselves not quietly, but violently, dragging everyone back into the shadows Victor once believed he had conquered. And if Matt Clark truly walks the streets again, then those shadows are far from finished. The possibility of Matt Clark returning to Genoa City sent a jolt of unease through the fabric of the Newman world. A disturbance that rippled beneath the surface like a long-buried ghost clawing its way back into existence. For years, fans and characters alike assumed that Victor Newman had eliminated Matt once and for all, closing a chapter soaked in malice, violence, and personal betrayal. Yet the newest revelation suggested something far more chilling. Victor had not killed Matt, nor had he simply released him into the shadows. Instead, it now appeared increasingly likely that Victor had chosen a far more sinister solution, one eerily reminiscent of the fate he later imposed on Jordan: the creation of a private, hidden prison where problematic figures could be contained indefinitely. This possibility forced the residents of Genoa City and the viewers watching from afar to confront a truth they always suspected, but rarely questioned. Victor did not simply defeat threats, he buried them, he controlled them. He locked them away where the world could not see, where the law held no reach, where morality was manipulated to serve one man's definition of justice. If Matt Clark had been subjected to such confinement, then his return meant not freedom, but escape, or, even more disturbing, a release orchestrated by Victor himself. Speculation intensified quickly. The idea of Matt plotting a thrilling escape from a homemade cell built in some forgotten wing of Victor's sprawling influence seemed like the obvious twist. But soap opera logic rarely settles for the expected, and fans sensed something deeper at play. What if Matt had not escaped at all? What if he was allowed out? What if Victor engineered his re-emergence into society not as a threat, but as a tool? The notion added a layer of psychological complexity to Matt's return, forcing everyone to reconsider the dynamics of power, captivity, and loyalty. Time does not move the same way for someone held captive in isolation. A man confined long enough becomes pliable, desperate, stripped of ego and identity until obedience becomes a survival mechanism. If Victor had indeed held Matt for years, charting his mental deterioration with calculated indifference, then Matt's return to Genoa City would not be the triumphant resurgence of a villain, it would be the debut of a reconstructed pawn. The possibility was unsettling because it suggested that Matt Clark might not return with the fiery vengeance fans remembered, but as someone transformed, hollowed out, his autonomy severed. In this interpretation, Matt's return becomes a darker narrative, not a story of rebellion or escape, but of conditioning, coercion, and psychological captivity. Victor, recognizing the growing instability of his empire, might seek to weaponize someone whose moral compass had already been shattered long before imprisonment. The perfect operative is not a loyal son or a trusted executive. It is a man broken into compliance, a man willing to follow any command if it means avoiding the torment of confinement. Matt Clark, stripped of his former bravado, might fit this profile more perfectly than anyone Victor could hire, threaten, or manipulate from the outside world. What makes this twist even more compelling is the shifting dynamic within the Newman family itself. The one person Victor once relied upon for morally ambiguous tasks, Adam Newman, has evolved beyond the role of obedient enforcer. Adam, battered by loss, betrayal, and the constant tug-of-war for his father's approval, has begun reclaiming pieces of his own moral identity. He no longer jumps when Victor snaps his fingers, no longer drowns himself in the belief that pleasing Victor is the only path to self-worth. Adam's refusal to blindly serve his father forces Victor into an uncomfortable position. When the one son capable of doing dirty work grows a conscience, the patriarch must look elsewhere. And that elsewhere points directly towards someone like Matt Clark, a man whose psyche may now be fractured enough to accept the chains of forced servitude as the only alternative to captivity. If Victor released Matt, it would not have been an act of mercy. It would have been a contract without words, a silent agreement cemented through power and fear. A man emerging from years of isolation, stripped of community, stripped of identity, stripped of agency, would cling to the first structure offered to him even if that structure was a cage disguised as loyalty. Victor, understanding the psychology of dominance better than most, would exploit this vulnerability with ruthless precision. He could place a tracker on Matt, subject him to constant surveillance, threaten him with reconfinement at the slightest deviation. The collar would not need to be physical, it would be embedded in Matt's trauma, a leash formed from the long, oppressive memory of captivity. To Genoa City, the return of Matt Clark would appear shocking, surreal, and dangerous. But to Victor, it might simply be a strategic maneuver, another calculated decision in a lifetime of ethically ambiguous choices. Matt's new role would not be that of a free man, but of a controlled operative, someone bound to Victor by fear, silence, and the haunting knowledge that disobedience would return him to the darkness he barely survived. Yet another angle deepens the intrigue. What if Matt has changed so profoundly that no one recognizes him not just in appearance, but in behavior? The idea of a villain returning as a shell of himself carries enormous dramatic weight. Fans remember Matt as cunning, charismatic, and vicious, a man capable of psychological manipulation and elaborate schemes. But years of isolation could erode those traits until only fragments remain. He might re-emerge soft-spoken, hesitant, watchful, twitching at sudden sounds, avoiding eye contact, haunted by memories no one else can access. His villainy would be replaced with an eerie ambiguity, leaving viewers questioning whether he is now victim, threat, or both. This ambiguity would be fertile ground for the writers. A reformed Matt Clark longing for redemption? A traumatized Matt unable to function in normal society? A conditioned Matt carrying out Victor's orders with robotic obedience? All variations open up endless dramatic possibilities, each one richer than the simplistic notion of a villain breaking out of a cage and returning to wreak havoc. But no twist in Genoa City comes without consequences. If Victor orchestrated Matt's confinement and subsequent release, the moral fallout would be catastrophic. Nikki's trust would fracture under the weight of yet another secret Victor hid from her. Nick, already spiraling into addiction and emotional instability, would unravel further upon learning his father imprisoned a man and manipulated him as a tool. Victoria, who walks a tightrope between admiration for her father's ruthlessness and fear of its implications, would see the brutal truth of the legacy she struggles to inherit. Even Adam, hardened though he is, would view Matt's broken reappearance as evidence that Victor's manipulations run deeper than any of them imagined.